Brian, what is on your radar?
Well, so if you've been tracking the record number of job openings that are out there and the coverage around that, you've probably also seen Reddit threads or Twitter threads of some job postings that look like this, that ask applicants. Okay, there it is. So $16 to $18 an hour is the offer there, and down at the bottom it says doctorate required. This is one of the more extreme ones that's been circulating around there, but you see an awful lot of these. And so the question that's been raised on Twitter, and this one Twitter thread went viral at the end of the year, asked, where on earth are these coming from? And so this particular thread made the argument that this is actually PPP loan fraud, that there is a reason that companies are out there putting up these kind of fake job postings that are then basically qualifying themselves for PPP loan forgiveness. And so in order to check that out, I went to this company called Bench Accounting, which does a lot of tax work for small businesses. They have FAQs up there, and they did videos for small businesses about how to make sure you get PPP loan forgiveness. And here's some of that.
One of the key criteria is that you need to maintain your level of headcount to the same as what it was pre-COVID. And now in your application process, on the form you put down your number of employees on payroll, and this number needs to be the same in order to qualify for full forgiveness. Now, there are a couple of kind of caveats to this or exceptions, and there's been a bit of guidance that's kind of come out over the last couple of weeks. So I'm going to cover a few FAQs around rehiring employees that you may have had to let go in the last few weeks, how you can still qualify for forgiveness. Now, to quickly reiterate what was kind of said in the application part of this process and that was put in the CARES Act, is that if you've had to lay off employees already, you can rehire them and still have this loan fully forgiven. Now, that's been kind of clear since the outset. What isn't clear is around what kind of happens if you've tried to get some of them to come back and you've been unsuccessful. Now, in theory, if you go through the PPP process and you go through those 8 weeks and you have fewer employees on payroll than you had last year, the reduction or the amount of the loan that can be forgiven is reduced in proportion to your reduction in headcount. So if you had 10 employees and now you've only got 8, your PPP loan, the amount that can be forgiven will be reduced by 20%, as it's a 20% reduction in headcount. The exception to this is if you can prove that you tried to get employees to come back and they rejected your offer. In that case, your PPP forgiveness will not be affected.
Okay, so the point of PPP loan program was to keep people in their jobs, and that makes sense. So you were forcing people to leave because of the pandemic to stop the spread of the virus. So you're then going to basically cover the payrolls of businesses that keep people on. But then the big question became, okay, well, what happens if the employee quits, the employee dies, the employee takes another job? Then can I get an exemption? Can I still keep the PPP loan money, or do I now have to pay it back? And here's some of the analysis on that.
You have proof of a letter of an offer of reemployment. So as part of that, it needs to be the same hours, the same salary and wages, and it should be in writing. So it should either be a letter or an email. And you need to also have proof of the rejection of that offer.
And so what your boss had to do is he or she had to email you and say, hey, look, you're welcome to come back to work. Same hours, same pay, same job. Would you like to come back? They're hoping that you say no, because if you say no, then they continue with their business reduced in its reduced capacity, and then they keep the PPP loan money and they don't have to pay it back, but they need it in writing from you that you don't want to come back. Or they need to at least have tried, and let's say you miss it and you don't come back. Okay, but then what happens? Now they're getting full payroll coverage while not having to actually pay a payroll. So a lot of businesses have said, do I have to hire somebody to replace that person? And the answer from tax experts, and I talked to some beyond this, is sort of. And here's how the same company, a different person at the same company put it.
The second component of that is that the borrower must have not reduced the number of employees or the average paid hours of employees between January 1st, 2020 and the end of the covered period or alternative covered period. You are also able to ignore any reductions that arose from an inability to rehire individuals who are employees on February 15th, 2020, if the borrower was unable to hire similarly qualified employees for unfulfilled positions on or before December 31st, 2020.
And there it is. So you can get an exemption from having to pay back your loan if you can't find somebody to fill that job of the person who left. And a lot of lawyers would say, look, if you're going to bid for this money, you need to show that you made some good faith effort to replace that person. But how can you make a good faith effort to replace that person without the risk of actually having to hire somebody? Because if you don't hire them, you get to keep all of the money. And so the way that you would do that is you would put out job openings that you have no intention of filling. And so I ran this theory by several economists and tax experts, and they said, yeah, this does in fact set up the incentives that original Twitter thread is talking about. More research would need to be done to determine, how many of the job openings fit this, but the incentives are definitely there. They have an FAQ on their website that reads the same thing. Note, if you're having a hard time getting your former employees back to work, you're not required to bring on new employees just to meet your headcount numbers. The SBA has provided some leniency in that case. And if they've required some leniency, it means you have to have shown good faith. And so, Robbie, this is similar. Anybody who's been on unemployment knows the reverse situation of this. You're required, in different states, you're required to apply for a couple of jobs, and you have to certify each week that you applied for a couple jobs and that you were not offered any jobs. And so in order to stay eligible for unemployment, people who don't feel like going back to work might apply to be a catcher for the Phillies. Or might apply to be a physician at a local hospital. Right. Because there's no rule that you have to specifically apply for something you're qualified for. Because at that point you want bureaucrats like going through every resume and questioning whether or not you're qualified for this. Now, I'm not qualified to be a catcher for the Phillies, but that would qualify. And so we understand this phenomenon in the unemployment space. It's well understood, documented. Economists have, and everybody knows people who have done this. I did some of this myself when I was on unemployment many years ago. And so, if the hospital offered me the job of physician, then okay, fine. I probably would have taken it. But so if you then went out and counted all of those applications as some type of important metric that said something about the real economy, you'd be getting it wrong, because those weren't real applications. Those were basically fake applications to jobs. And I think a lot of what we're seeing in these, in all of these, those extra millions of job openings that we have now, are basically fake job openings that if you apply for, you're not going to get. Not because you're not qualified, but because they don't want you to take that job. Now, the other question would be how much of the PPP loan forgiveness money is still outstanding, and there's still some analysis that needs to be done about that, because that would implicate, how much of an incentive there is. But you still have the question of an audit. Like, anybody who got the PPP loan can get audited, and so if they come back to you and say, hey, you never filled this position, but you took the exemption for it, like, well, look, I really tried. Look at this job posting. I just couldn't find a doctor who was willing to take a job at $16 an hour. People don't want to work anymore. And because people don't want to work anymore, how convenient. Let's kill the BBB that has corporate tax increases. Let's raise interest rates. Let's throw people out of work. Let's slow down the economy so that we can push wages down even further. So it works both ways.
When the government doles out a lot of money but attaches
I knew you would like this part,
interesting conditions to all of it, you have a lot of gaming of the system that will occur that is difficult to track, and that's the way it goes. So yeah, I don't like it.
Billions, and there's billions of fraud in this.
I mean, we haven't even begun. We are thinking about beginning to uncover the vast amounts of fraud we will no doubt find with this whole thing.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
All right, and Team Rising will join us next.